Hello, this is Dr. Shell with MBAadmit.com. Welcome to today's webinar about how to get into Wharton. Today, we want to give you some wonderful tips about how to put forward the best application possible to this wonderful institution. Before I get into today's topics, I want to tell you a bit more about myself, and the company that I run here, MBAadmit.com. So I'm Dr. Shell, and I'm the founder and president of MBAadmit.com. We've been providing admissions advising for over 30 years. We've had wonderful success with all the top 20 programs in the USA, as well as MBA programs abroad. One of the unique things about our company is that you're able to work directly with me if you opt to when you come in as a client to our company. I have Harvard admissions experience as well as work experience with McKinsey & Company and Morgan Stanley. Here's a list of some of the schools that we've had wonderful success with, and that list goes on. At the end of the broadcast, I will give you our contact information. There will also be a special offer on our services, and we will let you know how to stay in touch through our newsletter and other means. So for today, let's take a look at how we're going to structure today's talk. We want to first talk about Wharton, make sure you have a strong sense of what Wharton is all about, what it's looking for, and who has historically gained admission to Wharton. We want to go through the main components of the application process for them. So that is the application form and resume, the essays, the recommendations, and the interviews. So we have a part devoted to each of those four main areas. We can't really talk about the essays without also talking about the form and resume because they have to work in tandem. The form and the resume are both restricted in space, highly restricted when you compare it to other applications. And so you want to make sure that the essays work in tandem with that to put forward the best picture and portrait of your qualifications. You also need the recommendations to be supporting that application. So we'll go into all of those areas throughout this talk. So let's first talk about Wharton, make sure you have a clear understanding of the school, who's likely to get in, who they're looking for, and so forth. We'll start with rankings. We've pulled from the US News and World Report the rankings there. There are other institutions that also rank, such as Fortune. And so among the top 4 places that rank the MBA programs, Wharton normally shows up in the top 3. So in this ranking, it's number 1, tied with Harvard. The EMBA program is also number 1. But when people think about Wharton, they think about finance, and it's certainly more than just about finance. So you see that it is number 1 in finance, but it also has amazing strength in all these other areas. So accounting, marketing, international business, management, productions, and operations. So when you think of the school, you think of the breadth of the alumni, how strong that network is, that it is a top business school. And again, it does not look only for finance people, and it has strengths in many other areas. The general profile of the class, just to give you a sense of things, there were 6,679 applications last year and 851 enrolled. So it means that their demand is high and that the spaces, of course, are low. There was a 19.6% acceptance rate, according to US News and World Report. That just means that 80% they are actually rejecting. So that is a high number. So even though certainly 20% is a better figure than Stanford's 5% acceptance rate, it's still a restricted number. It just means that you have to put together the best application possible to be able to get success. The female number percentage is quite impressive. It's very good relative to many of the other schools, so 44%. International student number is also very robust. It also means that for those of you who are coming from abroad, you will have a very strong network once you go back abroad from Wharton in various parts of the world. There are 71 countries represented in the class of 2018. The US students of color, 32%, but that also includes not just underrepresented minorities, but also overrepresented. Worldwide, there are 96,000 graduates of Wharton. That would be graduates of the undergrad as well as the MBA program and other programs associated with the business school. But that's a very big number. And so it really does mean that this is a very formidable network for you. It is spread across 153 countries with 79 clubs. So that is one of the bigger selling points of Wharton, is just the strength of its network and what that can do for you. Now, this is very telling. The previous industry experience. Again, many people think that if you are going to be attractive to Wharton, it has to be that you're from finance, which is definitely not the case. You see that there's nearly 30% from finance. So that is a big number. So various parts of finance, whether private equity, investment banking, investment management, those together make up this 29% figure. But they also have 23% from consulting. That's a very big, healthy number. 12% from this combined category of nonprofit and government. Again, a pretty good number. They also have healthcare and real estate, media, tech. So it's a very diverse class. And so that's good news for people who are coming outside of finance. It's also good news for people, even if you are in finance, that want to make sure that you get a very broad exposure to different industries and viewpoints from people coming from different backgrounds, a very diverse class. In terms of majors, it's the same thing, diversity. So 26% were business, but 28% were STEM, 46% were other. So whether that's political science or something else, it could be literature. They're in that 46%, which means that if you were not a business major undergrad, you certainly shouldn't think that you won't have a good shot at Wharton. There's diversity in terms of the background academically. Other things to look at in terms of the class profile, the average work experience is 5 years, which is actually good news for most people. But so for those folks who have 8 years, you will not have aged out yet. For those who only have 3, you're still within the range. And so 5 is actually a good number. It sort of correlates to an average age of 26 to 27 upon matriculation. For the GMAT range, there is a good range here, but look at that 80% figure, 710 to 750. That is a very high 80% range. So we do find that Wharton tends to be pickier on the GMAT than many other schools, including Harvard. And so if you're applying there, just make sure you try to get a good score, particularly in the quant portion, because it is a quant heavy program and they want to make sure that you can thrive there. So 730 is the average GMAT score. 570 is the low part of that GMAT range, but again, it's reasonable to assume, obviously that 10% are going to be underneath that 710 figure. So you do not want to be trying to count on the fact that you can be scoring there and be successful. You want to try to get into the 700s if you can, 710 or above ideally. In terms of the GMAT range, GPA range, 3.6 is the average. We do find that when we get a candidate who has like a 3.2, 3.1, that person can be very viable still as a candidate to Wharton. It's all about putting the application together very well. We've even had people with 2.7 GPAs get in, and again, it's all a factor of what caused that 2.7. Do they have professional successes to show for, to sort of compensate for that? And what is the overall storyline? So, the GPA, what I do like about Wharton is there is flexibility. You don't have to come there with a 3.9 GPA, and they look at the broader picture of success as they are evaluating your application. The post-MBA industry, this is also very relevant for people who are looking at Wharton, because if you're in financial services, obviously they place extremely well there. But if you're outside of that, some people are always worried about, can I get the job I'll be seeking? And as you see, very, very impressive diversity. Actually, the numbers sort of correlate to the pre-MBA industries in terms of the percentages for each of these. And it just means that you get all the top prestigious employers from most of these industries seeking the Wharton graduate. They all know that a Wharton graduate is a very well-educated and well-tooled professional, and so you would be very attractive. And so this sort of can reassure you in terms of what can be the options after you're leaving Wharton. This is also another interesting fact. Where do people end up? Okay, so this is only for the immediate post-MBA job. So 13% sounds a little bit low in terms of international, but that doesn't mean that people don't go back eventually. The rationale sometimes is that people want to go ahead and earn the money in the USA and pay down whatever student loans they have before they go back abroad. So that number is probably underrepresenting who actually eventually goes abroad. But 87% stay in the United States, and the breakdown is majority in the Northeast. And for those of you who are in California and wondering, can Wharton serve your purposes? That is a very big number, 22%, to say that 22% of the graduating class will go back to the West. That's a very nice number as well. So that gives you a sense of, again, where people end up and where they're being recruited, and how that might function for you. In terms of students starting their own businesses, 6% are starting their own businesses, and about 9% are returning to a prior company. Some of those prior companies will be a family business. In terms of starting their own business, that number is not too far off from where Harvard is in terms of entrepreneurs as well. So that's a pretty decent showing to say that right after business school, those folks are starting their own business. Now, on the whole, what is the difference between the Wharton admit and the Harvard and Stanford admit? We'll go into this in various parts as we go forward. But in general, what we find is this, that there's more flexibility in the GPA. So for the person who has a 3.1 or 3.2 applying to Wharton, I'm not necessarily worried yet. Whereas if they were applying to Harvard, that may not yet be satisfying for Harvard in terms of the academic achievement. The GMAT is actually, like I said, Wharton, it tends to be a little bit pickier than Harvard tends to be. And so if I see someone who doesn't have a strong GMAT score, especially if the quant portion is not strong, that's a big flag, and we do have to address that in the strategy. And it's possible we've had people with 680s get into Wharton, but there has to be a whole strategy to show that they will be able to do the work at Wharton and contribute. The extracurricular activities don't tend to need to be as high or as strong as they will need to be for the successful admit to Harvard and Stanford. So Harvard says it's looking for a habit of leadership. They want to see that not only through the professional record, but also in the extracurricular arena. If you're lacking that somewhat, usually that does not hurt you as much when you're applying to Wharton, and other factors can be more important than that. And then again, age. Wharton does seem to be more flexible. Last year we had a couple people between 32 to 34 get into Wharton. And at some of the other schools, Harvard and Stanford in particular, they're known for preferring a much younger candidate. So someone at age 34 often will not even advance to interview at Harvard. So the flexibility in age is something that's quite nice as well. Other things that we've seen about Wharton, again, to give you a sense of how you might fare at this school, is in these dimensions, we also see differences in terms, especially when you're comparing it with Harvard and Stanford. Prestige of college and company is not as important at Wharton. So if you didn't go to Princeton, it's not going to hurt you as much at Wharton. Or how did you do where you went to school? The same thing with a company. If you're coming from a small entrepreneurial group and most people have never heard of it, that is not necessarily going to hurt you at Wharton. It's more a matter of, can you present in the essays and the recommendations a compelling view on the quality of that work experience, the value of it, and how you'll be able to draw on that to contribute to the class. In terms of country of origin, that's another thing. At some schools, the country of origin impacts very strongly whether you will be competitive. And so at some schools, they're just not going to be receptive to many candidates coming out of India, or they may not be receptive to candidates coming out of East Asia or parts of East Asia. And so you sort of need to know the nuances of each of those schools and what countries and regions of the world they prefer. What I like about Wharton is Wharton doesn't seem to have that. It is very open to candidates from all over the world. And so I call that more transparent. It means that the decision is made more on your qualifications, and something like country of origin is not going to be something that will, give you a big disadvantage. Orientation, and by that I mean sexual orientation. Some people ask, how does that impact my application? If I'm bisexual, is that going to increase my odds of getting into the school? In our experience with Wharton, it does seem to help tilt the scales. So if someone is a bit on the edge in terms of academics, orientation does tend to have a positive impact. And then in terms of non-traditional background, if someone is coming, they're a teacher, or if they are coming from a policy tank, we actually find Wharton is not as receptive to that candidate. And it may not be so much the actual area as the candidate did not demonstrate an ability to do the quantitative work. So for those people who are coming from those non-traditional backgrounds, you need to make sure that you show somehow that you're able to do the quant. You need to have some sort of metrics to show. We have had people successful from those backgrounds. One of our candidates from Teach for America got in with a scholarship. It's just that, you know, again, you have to make sure you're doing the right things for this program, which is very quantitative in how it approaches the problem solving in the classroom. And then finally, the team player attitude is very important also at Wharton. So one thing that we've noticed with them is that if they get a candidate in an interview and their sense is that that person is not a good team player, that alone could be a reason for not getting the admission. So you want to make sure that in your essays as well as in the actual interview that you are making it clear that you know what a good team player is, that you have those attributes. So now on to the Wharton application form and the resume. The reason that we are going to talk about this first, before we go into the essays, is because, again, the space on these is very restricted. Here are some trends of the application process over the past like 4 or 5 years. And this is actually making the essays and the recommendations much more important. You used to be able to put a lot more information about your job. So you could describe your job, you could describe your awards, you could describe your extracurricular activities on the actual application form. Today, there's pretty much no room for any description. So you write your title, you know, how many hours a week for the extracurricular, and what the organization is, but there's not room to actually describe what you're doing. The same with most other things. One of the few spaces you actually get is to describe awards, like academic awards. And so it is very restricting. And so that kind of shifts the importance to the resume. And yet it is a one-page resume. So again, you have very restricted space. Many of the other schools permit a 2-page resume. Bear in mind that it is an application resume, not a job resume. So it's okay to use 2 pages if the school allows that. But when you have a 1-page resume, again, it means that you can't really explain your extracurriculars in depth. And both of those together mean that certain things are more important. Your title is more important. The title, both in terms of your job as well as extracurricular, how many promotions might make more of a difference. Your starting versus your ending salary might make more of a difference. Because again, the resume and the application form don't let you highlight a whole lot more information than that. It just means that your essays and the recommendations have to make up for that. Now, the essays are reduced in numbers relative to past years, both in terms of number of essays and in terms of the size. So this year we have, the first essay is 500 words, the second essay is 400 words, which is not a lot of space. And then this year, a change from last year is the recommendation forms themselves. There are 3 questions, but now those responses are also capped. So it's a total of 900 words that you're able to give on the recommendation response. You get 2 recommendations, so that's 1,800 words that are working for you. But again, it's shorter. Last year, there was no restriction. So if someone wanted to submit a 1,400 word recommendation, they could do that. The interview is also more important, especially in the last years as they shifted to a group interview. They're not just assessing your ability to present your own case for admission. They're also assessing how well do you interact in a group. Are you someone who can identify value-added ideas and contribute those? Are you comfortable speaking in front of a group? And that's really essentially assessing what would you be like in the classroom, and they are making part of their admissions decision on that. So these are trends that are going to affect you and your application. What it means, though, this impact is mostly referring to the restricted space. The restricted space on the resume as well as the application form is that you can't use those spaces as easily to try to override weakness. So if you have, you know, a 3.0 GPA or a 2.9 GPA, there's not a whole lot of space to be able to explain that in those 2 pieces. And so the essays, again, have to make up for that. So do the recommendations. So when you're doing your application, generally your strategy should bear in mind those changes. So the recommendations become the prime real estate. You need to know that all of what is said in that has to fully be working for you. So you should try to, you know, sit down with your recommendation writers, help them understand what sort of topics are best going to support your application. And then again, the essays need to be seen also as prime real estate, where you should be putting forth a compelling portrait of where you're going in the future, the sort of student you can be at the school, and why your presence at the school would be value added. What we at MBAadmic.com call a strategic approach to the essays and the recommendations and the resume, what we call a strategic approach takes into account these factors. So basically, when the school's looking at you, the three things that are on their minds is, are you successful professionally? Are you successful in terms of academics? And have you shown success in the extracurricular arena? If you also have a strong personal story, you want to showcase that as well. Not everybody does. Not everybody has that unique story, but for those who do, you want to highlight that. So the strategic approach to the content will bear in mind that you want to reflect well on all these areas, because these are some of the areas they most care about. The resume, on that note, is one of the most often missed opportunities, because it is one document where you can actually show the strengths in all those areas in one place. And so you can showcase your academic strengths, you can showcase your extracurricular strengths, and you can also showcase the professional achievement all on one document. So when we approach the resume, we definitely want to make sure that by looking at the resume alone, the school is seeing all the elements of success that they associate with the candidate they want to admit. So pay a good attention to how you're putting together that resume. Make sure that it shows a snapshot of success in the key areas that we just talked about, that you are highlighting leadership whenever possible, that you're conveying the words in business relevant terms. And that's especially important for those of you who are coming from outside of the mainstream business world. So if it's an engineer or a teacher, you need to explain the business relevancy of your work, and it's very possible to do that. It's about wording and emphasis and stressing the transferable skills. And also you want to show action-oriented, you want to be action-oriented in your words, as well as actually results-oriented. You want to show anytime that you had an impact and you had a result. If you can quantify that in some places, do that. And that together will put together a very good resume for you. So with that in mind, now we have to move to the essays. This is the heart of what we call your marketing package. So essentially, this is where you get some good space, and it's your job to try to sell them in these two essays that you have, that you're going to achieve great things in the future, that the school is the right place for you, and that you will be very value added to the school. So again, it's your marketing package, and you need to see it as, you know, when they put down those two essays, have you painted that portrait that will make them want to say, yes, we want to interview this person. And ideally, the essays are so strong that they're already wanting to admit you. So again, go back to that strategic approach. Try to see what kind of professional successes do you want to highlight in those essays. Is there a space to put in the academic references to success, particularly with quant proficiency? Extracurricular success, are there opportunities for you to weave that in and show that because you've been successful in the past with extracurriculars, you're going to be able to make an impact at the school? And then again, personal story. For the person that has a strong personal story, you want to weave it into the essays, because that pulls you out of the pack. It differentiates you. So again, strategic content, it means not only what we just discussed, it also means that if you have a weakness, you are trying to indirectly address that weakness in the essay content. Sometimes you need to do it directly, but in many cases, probably more cases, you can do it indirectly. So if someone had a low GPA, low for Wharton might be 3.0, then there's ways to talk about your successes with analytical things, or even in courses or certifications, that indirectly redirect the attention to those successes. And so you know that for you, it's a priority to get references into the essays that will touch on those things. Making the future as important as the past is also a very important strategic thing to do. For some of you, you've been very successful in the past, and so that will be a huge selling point for your candidacy. For others, you may have had a bit of a disjointed career, or maybe you were not as focused as you should have been in college. But when you make the long-term goal very attractive to the school and very realistic in terms of you're achieving it, then again, you're redirecting the attention. So again, that's a strategic use, a strategic choice. Sometimes it's also useful to capitalize on business trends. So for candidates who are interested in fintech, that's obviously an up and growing area. For those who are interested in social impact, it's an area that's experiencing growth. Sometimes it's possible to look at where things are going in your industry and then again, bring that into your discussion in your essays in ways that make you appear to be someone who's going to be making a difference for your particular industry. So that's strategic content. Professional success, by the way, you do want to definitely showcase that with Wharton, because that is one of the more important things that they're assessing. And you do that in the essays, but you also do that through the recommendations. And again, you should be working with your writers to help them, guide them to know what sorts of things they would ideally focus on, so that they're making sure to establish that professional success. And then again, you want to have references in your resume, but make sure that you're paying attention to that as well, because professional success from the past is also very important for admissions. So here are the questions for this year. Again, essay 1 is 500 words, essay 2 is 400 words. The first one is, what do you hope to gain professionally from the Wharton MBA? The second is, teamwork is at the core of the Wharton MBA experience, with each student contributing unique elements to our collaborative culture. How will you contribute to the Wharton community? So again, going back to this again, you want to just show all these successes within those essays. Get to that personal story if you're able to. And so how does that look, essay 1? Make sure you're not just answering it in terms of a philosophical essay. You don't want to be sitting there saying, oh, professionally, this is the high in the sky thing that I'm sort of thinking about, and this is why your school might be a great place. And they really want to hear details. They want to see a vision. So what are your career goals? You can use that to really distinguish yourself and pull yourself out of the pack. What are your skill and knowledge needs given those goals? I mean, you've certainly achieved things today, you've deepened skills, you've broadened your knowledge, but what are your needs going forward? And you need to very specifically say, Wharton will meet those needs, and be specific. And so again, why is Wharton right for you? That should be detailed. The details do matter. You want to show a fit between your needs and Wharton. So you need to take advantage of a lot of different things. They have 200 electives. They have majors that are very specific. They have career treks and global consulting practicum and immersion experiences in other countries, short and long term. They have an opportunity to go study in San Francisco for a semester. I mean, there's all these opportunities that the school gives you. You need to show how will you take advantage of that, and how will it meet the needs that you're saying you have in order to meet your goals in the future. Another part of fit is not just the curriculum, but it's also the culture. It's more the social thing. And so show that you fit with the values of the school, the culture of the school. They certainly stress teamwork, so you want to be making sure to demonstrate where you've been part of a team and added value. And so show that fit as well, both in the essays and other parts of the application. And very importantly also, you want to comment on how are you going to actually contribute to Wharton based on the past as well. So if you were to say, I want to impact this particular club, it's nice to say that, but it actually has more believability when you can look at the past and say, when I was doing such and such before, this is the impact I brought. And so I'm going to draw on that at Wharton to enhance that environment. And so draw on both the past, but link it also to what Wharton has and what you would like to impact at Wharton. And again, details matter. So this essay should have great detail to show that you're convinced that Wharton is the right place, that you're going places, it will equip you, and that you can contribute. This next essay, though, goes more in depth on what are you going to specifically contribute. So again, not a philosophical essay. It shouldn't be too high level. You should actually have details in there about, from each part of your background, professional, academic, extracurricular, how can you contribute to Wharton? in the wording of this essay, they are stressing collaboration. They are stressing unique contributions. They're stressing teamwork. And so show how you've done that in the past. How have you used your unique background to make a difference? Where have you collaborated with great impact and great results? Do you know how to be a team player, and where did you pick up that skill, and what will you contribute once you're at Wharton in that regard? And again, details matter. You should be making references to specific clubs or courses or special programs that you want to impact while you're there. And those details will make the difference between a great essay and an essay that's not so great. Going to the recommendations. The recommendations, many people do not realize how important they are. But the recommendations usually weigh as heavily as your essays. So you can have a beautiful, almost perfect essay set, but one recommendation that's even lukewarm, or worse still, is actually harmful to you, can derail the entire application. So we at MBAAdmit.com pay a whole lot of attention to the recommendations because we know how heavily they impact. We also know that they can go a long ways to really differentiating you and convincing the committee that you would be an outstanding choice for the school. So you do want to pay good attention to the recommendations. Strategic content is something you want to actually think about also with the recommendations. And this is what I mean by that. So again, consider the person who has a 3.1 GPA, which by Wharton standard is on the low side. And then also maybe you have a quant score, which might be 720, but the quant portion you have 60th percentile, 64th percentile on quant, which again for Wharton is going to be low. So now Wharton naturally is going to have a concern about, can you get into our program and thrive in what is a very quant heavy school where they focus on data to make decisions in the classroom on cases that they're studying. So again, calculus is something they're going to assume that most people need to have the strength in that, and statistics. And so they're going to be concerned. Now, certainly there are things that you can do, take courses online that will strengthen up in those areas, and then you can present those credentials. But the recommendations can also be doing work for you to help offset that concern. So if your recommendation writer has noticed that you've done a lot of fantastic analytical work using data, they certainly need to showcase that in their responses. And so your job is to guide them as to what the needs of your candidacy are, and if there are special things, special weaknesses that they can help to offset, you would like them to try to address some of those things. They definitely want to talk about leadership abilities and leadership potential. Sometimes a candidate has not actually led a team yet, and that's okay, because even if you haven't led a team, it's possible that you have shown leadership traits, okay? So you may be someone who can bring direction to work, who can help motivate a team. You need to have the writer focus on leadership qualities as much as they can. If you have other strengths, whether it's communication or an ability to really gain the trust of the client, you want to, again, have them direct them to those strengths, the ones that will pull you out of the pile. You don't want a recommendation to simply say, this person is a good team player, I can rely on this person, and they're a nice person. Those are good things, but that is not distinguishing. And so you want to try to make sure that the writer understands what qualities truly this school values: leadership, innovation, ability to persuade, someone who loves new ideas, and help them to focus on those items in the recommendations. Here is the specific recommendation form for this year for Wharton. Now, this is a change, a big change from the last few years. So this recommendation form is specific to Wharton, and so your writers will have to actually pay very good detail to how they're writing this recommendation. Some of the other schools have what they call the common recommendation, where they're using the same 2 to 3 questions and similar grids. And so Wharton has sort of stepped away from that. And so the first thing that you're going to encounter, the writer will encounter, is these 2 lists of words, traits, and they want the writer to choose up to 3. It doesn't have to be 3, but they can choose 1, they can choose 2, but up to 3 in each of these categories that most describe you. So again, you need to look at the list more in the abstract and think, okay, which ones probably are the best ones. But you also need to look and think in terms of your candidacy and what the needs of your candidacy are. And again, maybe help to guide the writer as to what will be the best mix for you. Here are the specific questions. Now, these again are specific to Wharton. Number one, please provide examples that illustrate why you believe this candidate will find success in the Wharton MBA classroom. And then number two is, please provide examples that illustrate why you believe this candidate will find success throughout their career. And then the last one is there anything else we should know? Now, the first question some people will have is, should I have something in the optional? My answer would be yes, because it's extra space. They cap each of these, by the way, at the very top in the highlight. Each of these is capped at 300 words, 7,500 characters max. Now, 7,500 characters is far more than you will need for any one of these if you're restricting it to 300 words. So it's definitely more characters than you could probably use. So the operating number really should be 300 words. There is a word counter. It's actually a character counter where they upload the recommendations. So I do recommend that you stay within the word limits. There are many applications where there are not word counters for either the essays or the recommendations, in which case you can go a little bit over without it being a problem. But in this case, I would recommend you stay within the word limits. And so with the optional, you have 300 words. And so I would be saying definitely use it as more of an opportunity to sell your candidacy with an application where you're restricted in so many other places to present information. So when you're thinking about this, you need to think very carefully about what are Wharton's values. And so when it says, why do you think this person can be successful in the Wharton classroom? Think about the values: teamwork, analytical excellence, collaboration, new ideas, innovation. I mean, think through what are some of those main values, hone in on some. 300 words means that you shouldn't be trying to talk about 10 different things. You want to go in depth on a smaller number, but do try to make sure that it's going to be reflecting the values that Wharton cares about. And then in terms of number two, why will you be successful throughout your career? Again, think about what makes one of the most successful leaders out there, a thought leader, someone who's influencing industry, someone who's able to grow a business and scale a business. What are some of those qualities? And try to make sure you're reflecting that in this response. For the optional, ideally, it's going to be more of a continuation of your strengths. So they continue to talk about not only your strengths, but how are you stronger than other candidates? Like, why would they choose you over other candidates? And they would be referring to the past as well as what they think of your future. So it is important for them to be adding here and there an anecdote, very short, this is a very short recommendation, but an anecdote here and there, so a short story that illustrates some of the things, some of the traits that they're going to highlight. And you wouldn't do that with all of them, but you would do it with some of them. And so in the optional areas, while they might say, here's another way this person really stands out, some of those examples may have the short little story with it. So that's how you would think about this recommendation. It is actually a good opportunity to really support the application. A couple warnings for you. Some of you will be doing, say, the Harvard recommendation or the Stanford recommendation. You don't want to look like you cut and paste from those and just put it into Wharton. So for those recommendations, there's a question about constructive feedback. What constructive feedback did they give you and how did you respond? Now, if you clip that out and stick it under the optional, it's going to be very obvious that that's what you did, which won't necessarily go down well with Wharton. They want to know that you really put attention on this application. In some of the other parts, so for Harvard and Stanford, they both ask the question, how do you stand out relative to peers? That language can be appropriate to this one. But again, make sure that things are worded so that the appearance is that you truly put time into this recommendation and you didn't just cut and paste from others to put it into this. Interviewing tips. Now this part is important because Wharton a few years back switched over to a group interview, and it is challenging and it is actually a place where they're going to eliminate people. So Just because you get through the interview at Wharton, and that's a great thing if you do, a great achievement, but it does not mean that you're going to get the admission, because this interview is actually important. And we've received people who came to us after getting rejected from Wharton, where they were given the feedback that your interview just didn't go well, and they're talking about the group portion. The two things that mostly go wrong with the group interview is that someone is not speaking up enough, and so the admissions committee is going to get the impression that that person may not be a contributor in the classroom, and maybe just nervousness. And so, you know, the more you sort of practice things, the better. But let's just, before we go into that detail, that advice, let's just talk about what is the interview. So basically, there's going to be a group interview portion, a 1-minute presentation in most cases. So basically, once you're invited to the interview, you're going to get an email from the admissions committee saying, you're invited to the interview, here's a topic that's going to be the topic for the group portion. Think about what you want to say to the group, and you'll take time to put together a 1-minute response that you're going to present at the beginning of the discussion. And then the group is going to decide whose idea to go forward with, and then you're going to put together a deliverable. So deliverable means, if the prompt was design a new course for Wharton, so design a new course, then you would have to come up with your own idea about what that course would be before you get to the interview. Then you're going to present it to the group. You'll be with about 4 to 5 other candidates, randomly chosen. So they're not trying to get any sort of rounding out in terms of backgrounds. It's based on when you say you're free to have that interview. So there'll be 4 to 5 of you in that room, and you will put forward your ideas one at a time, and then the group will choose which one to go forward with. And so you have to be prepared that yours may not be the one that's chosen. And then from that point on, you're going to have to be very comfortable helping the group to advance their analysis on how do you develop this course. And then you'll have a deliverable for the committee at the end of this discussion. After that portion, you're going to go off to a 10-minute one-to-one interview. And that part is very short. It's also very traditional. So you don't normally get curveballs in that part of the interview. But again, it's a challenging interview. Some people are more comfortable in group settings than others. For those that are not very comfortable, you do need to try to take some efforts to practice in other settings before the real interview with Wharton. But let's get you a little bit of advice. Now, for the group interview portion, here are some things to do and not do. Don't talk too little. That is a big flag to them, and it may be a misinterpretation, but that they're going to conclude that you will not be a big contributor in the classroom. So you need to be comfortable speaking up. Don't talk too much. The other side is that when someone appears bossy or trying to dominate over other people, that is not seen as good either. And so that would hurt the candidate. Don't humiliate a peer. What I mean by that is sometimes people, when you see them in group settings, one person trying to impress other people might say, well, Donna, you haven't chimed in yet. Why didn't you say something? That to me is humiliating Donna. Donna may be terrified and very nervous, and now you just put attention on her. And the committee may not be thinking that was a nice thing to do. You may have been doing it trying to impress people, but the impact is humiliating that peer. So you want to avoid anything that appears like that. In terms of the value on teamwork, that just means that even if you are disagreeing with a point someone put forward, you need to do it in a tactful way. Now, granted, in the classroom, when you're a student, you may not be as tactful, but for this interview, it's better to be tactful. So even if someone has made a point you disagree with, you can say politely, you know, that's an interesting point, but I actually disagree for multiple reasons, and then put forward your reasons. There was nothing disrespectful about that, the way you said it, the tone. So just be mindful of constructive feedback, the idea of being constructive, not sort of tearing down someone else's ideas, and again, teamwork, supporting the team in what it's trying to do in this group interview. You do need to practice how to get your voice heard. So some people do that very well. They might be consultants, and so they naturally are doing that in front of the client all the time. But for those of you that are not in group settings often, or group meetings, you need to sort of study, how do you get your voice in there? You know, and just how do you edge in and build on a point someone else said, or state a totally different point. And that may mean that you need to practice this more than other people before the group interview. And then again, study group mannerisms. Sometimes it's easy to just go to a show on TV where there's a round table and they've got 6 to 7 people, and just kind of study the mannerisms. Who is impressive, who's a little annoying, and just kind of see what you're seeing and be able to apply that to yourself so that in the group interview, it all goes well. The 1-minute presentation, the topics can vary vastly, so they've varied quite a bit in the last 4 years. But one thing that I think I see my own candidates, like I encourage them to tell me beforehand what they're thinking of presenting. And one thing that I've seen them do that I correct, so they're not doing it before they get to the actual interview, is that they choose their area of specialty. But if you do that, then you might look myopic, like you don't have an ability to have broader interests. So for instance, if I have someone who is specializing in healthcare big data, and then the topic is propose a new course, and they say, oh, I think we should get a course on healthcare big data, it just looks totally unidimensional, and a lot of your other classmates will not benefit from a course like that. If they were to just broaden it out, how is data being used today to bring transformation in different industries? It's broader. It's just a better topic. And so don't be myopic, don't be unidimensional. The same, I'll give another example. So a candidate who was coming out of a country in Africa, for him to say, I want to propose that we have a course that goes back to my home country, sometimes that could be okay, but it might even be better to say, my country shares a whole lot of stuff in common with developing countries in Asia. I would like to put together a course that focuses on developing countries in Asia. Again, now he starts to look like he's got great broad interests, and that course will be relevant to many classmates. And so again, think about how you're appearing in terms of the breadth of your interests. Make sure in a topic like this that you are studying what Wharton offers beforehand, so you're not putting forward something they already have. Make sure that you're able to explain the benefits to your classmates of whatever it is that you're suggesting. It's not always a course. I mean, 1 year it was, how can we recruit better? What would you put together as our approach to recruiting? But it's still the fact that you want to be able to explain the benefits. Make sure that you're trying to be structured in your delivery as you give your presentation. And then as much as you're able, practice and practice some more, and then relax. Hopefully at the day of the interview, you're relaxed because you've practiced enough to be somewhat at ease at what you're about to put forward. The one-to-one interview portion, again, 10 minutes is very short. Sometimes candidates are asked, how did that group session go? You can state your comments, but try to stay positive. And then otherwise prepare for commonly asked interview questions. In our experience, our candidates are not asked crazy out of the camp questions in this portion. So just preparing for commonly asked MBA interview questions should get you pretty far to be able to handle the 10-minute one-to-one portion. So taking a step back, is it possible to override a notable weakness to gain admission to Wharton? Yes, we've had, like I said, we've had long shot candidates who had 2.7 GPAs. We have the 34-year-old applying who gets in, so there's always ways to make yourself attractive. It's all about the whole package. The challenge with Wharton is simply that because they have cut back on the space of the essays and the resume and the application form, you have to be so much more targeted in how you're doing that. Here are some examples of Longshot Successes. You can read that through, but we certainly have had wonderful successes. Like I said, even if you have a GMAT score that's under 700, it doesn't mean you can't get in. One of our candidates last year had about a 680, and she was very low on quant. I think she wasn't above 50% on quant, and she got in. And it was just the breadth, the strength of the whole rest of the application, and the support of the recommendations as well. We've had people who are private equity. I mean, there's going to be a ton of people applying with that background. You want to time your application well. You also want to make sure you're distinguishing yourself in key ways. And again, that's the strategy behind the content. So you can read this list over, but hopefully it'll give you some hope if you do have a weakness that you have to overcome. And again, one thing I do like about Wharton is it really is looking for a breadth of students, and having one weakness doesn't necessarily close the door. So feel free to contact us. We're going to do a Q&A after this, I understand. But before we get to that, let me just walk you through a few things. For those of you who would like us to give you a profile evaluation, I'm more than happy to do that. Just reach us at the website, mbaadmit.com. There is a profile evaluation right there when you get to the homepage. And so just click on that and you can submit the form. Alternatively, you can just send your resume to us and ask for profile evaluation, and we're more than happy to do that. For those of you who have attended, we're more than happy to give you a discount on our gold pricing. And so we can send you information about that. Just send us an email about the gold service. That's our most popular service, the gold and the gold plus. And I'm more than happy again to give a discount on that for those of you who attended today. And then our newsletter, for those of you who want to stay in touch and get insights about the MBA admissions process, feel free to sign up for that newsletter. The link is right there that you see. Go ahead and go there, sign up, just give us your email and we will send out the next newsletter to you. And so finally, this is our contact information. Feel free to stay in touch with us, write us. If there's any way we can help you in the process, let us know. We definitely love to work with candidates to Wharton and other business schools. And again, the strategy really does make a difference, and it can normally help you to access schools that you may not have been able to access otherwise. Okay, so I think we're about to go into Q&A. So I'm gonna get back to a place where I can see your questions and I will respond. Okay, I see some questions coming through here. So let me just respond to some of the ones that I see. So, okay, the first one I see is, how do you demonstrate leadership if you do not manage others or large projects? There's definitely many ways to demonstrate leadership. So the first thing that you should do is write out traits of what is leadership. That can help you a lot. So leadership is bringing vision to work. It's encouraging others. It's being able to rally a team to be motivated to give their best. It's even having to work with people that you don't have authority over. I mean, imagine the investment banker who's about in the second or third year. That person may not be leading a team, but they, as they do their daily work, may need to have information from a different department. You're going to have to reach across and get that person to give you the information fast. And so there's a bit of managing that person, even though you don't have authority over them. You're motivating them to work with you. You're communicating the value of the work you're doing so that they're willing to try to take some of their time to help you out. And so leadership can be many things. And the best way for you to think about how to demonstrate it is to write out what are some of the qualities of leadership and then identify when you've put those into practice. So again, even if you've not led a team, you definitely can give the impression of leadership by making references to when you showed other traits. Okay, so another question I have is, how do you differentiate Wharton content between essay 1 and 2? Essay 1 was asking, what do you hope to gain professionally? And so in that particular one, your goals, short-term and long-term, should factor in more heavily than in essay 2, which is not asking for that. Essay 2 is asking, how are you going to contribute to Wharton, especially given the fact that they stress teamwork and collaboration. And so in the first essay, your career goals will be more central. You may actually review a bit about your own work history and make it clear what it is how you're prepared already, but then make it clear how you still have to develop, and then explain what then Wharton will allow you to do professionally in terms of building up for your goals. The second question, again, is more about what are you going to have to contribute to us? And so that can be all different things. It can be academic contributions. It can be extracurricular contributions. It can be professionally, what do you give? And so it's a more diverse essay, and you also might be making reference to more things like clubs in the second essay. Okay, another question. if I have a Wharton alumni at my workplace in a different function, can I ask her to send a letter of reference? Well, let me just answer that in two ways. You sound like you're talking about an informal reference as opposed to a formal reference. And let me just answer with both. Okay, so when it's a formal one, it is much better to use people who know your work directly. The school wants to know that you've been successful professionally. So sometimes even a mentor won't be able to give the depth of details that would be ideal, because you want someone who's seen your work and who is superior to you. So it doesn't have to always be a direct supervisor. Sometimes people can actually tell the direct supervisor, but it does need to be someone superior to you who knows your work well. And so if that alumni doesn't fit into that category, probably is not the right person for a formal recommendation. But that person could write a letter of reference and send it into the committee. You do want to bear in mind that many people know Wharton alumni. And so the value of that is probably not, you just don't overstate how important that might be, because a lot of people know Wharton people. And so you really should, if you have to, put more attention and effort into the actual formal recommendations. For Indian applicants, the GMAT requirements seem much higher. What do I recommend as a sweet spot? That is a very, very good question. Now, I'm responding to this in terms of Indian foreign nationals. Okay, so one question I often get is, if I'm Indian descent, but I'm Canadian by citizenship, or if I'm an American of Indian descent, is it the same standard? And the answer is no. So your citizenship is what is defining. So if you happen to be of Indian descent, but you are a Canadian, the Canadian is what is going to guide everything. And the Canadian can have a lower GMAT score than the Indian foreign national typically. So this is just a generalization, but in general, for Wharton, for an Indian foreign national male, I would say that a 740 is a score that is not going to get you cut. 730 is probably the bare minimum. 720 puts you in the danger zone. And again, on all those, the quant ideally would be pretty good. So pretty good means 49, 50, or 51 on the raw score. In terms of female Indian applicants, so Indian foreign national female, I think there's a little bit more wiggle room. So, you know, last year, one of our candidates with a 710, who was Indian foreign national female, got into Wharton. And she's also very young. So she was, on top of that, I think she had 2 or 3 years of work experience, and was age-wise very young, I think 23 or 24. So, you know, women have a little bit more latitude, but to be honest, in the past 5 years, I've seen women really narrow the gap. I mean, I think 15 years ago, I saw a big gap between the quality of female applicant and male applicant for Indian foreign nationals. Today, I don't see that difference. So I often will get candidates who are, you know, topper of their class, or top, you know, 10%, and then amazing GMAT score, 750, 760, who are female. But I still think there's a little bit more latitude there. So for the females, you may have a little more latitude. There's always exceptions. So even if you're a male Indian foreign national with a 700 GMAT score, you don't have to just assume it's a closed door, but you do have to work hard to make up for that in other ways. I'm going to take that same question though and apply it to other people. So for people, I mean, the GMAT score average that is going to be acceptable is a function of what other people of your profile tend to have. And so when I get candidates out of Latin America, it's actually rare for me to see anybody above a 680 GMAT score. And so that person is still going to be competitive at Wharton, simply because it's very rare to see someone who has a 700 out of Latin America. And part of that is probably that English is a second language. When I have a Canadian, that person is treated very much like a US candidate. Therefore, 700 and higher is probably fine for the GMAT. In the 600s is going to put you more at risk. And so just bear that in mind, and just know that your country of origin does impact in terms of where you need to be for the GMAT. Another question. I guess we're going to need to start to wrap up soon. So let me just try to take one more question. And if the moderator feels there's any other question that is worth responding to, I can. I can actually also say that you can email me if you have questions you want me to answer. Email me at my website, and then I will direct you to my GMAT Club. I have a forum on GMAT Club where I can answer additional questions. And so let me just answer. And by the way, I'll see if they can actually add the link to that chat on GMAT Club so that you'll know where to go if you want to go ahead and post additional questions. But let me just see if I can get to one or two. Let's see. So let's see. Okay, I have a question about the applicant who's 36. 36 is very challenging. What they're gonna, it just depends on your background. So the question is, you know, at 36, will I basically have a chance or not at the full-time program? The problem is that they have the executive MBA program. And so when someone's 36 and has been working since they were 22, the school is usually gonna think you probably have reached a point where the executive is the right program for you. And so they'll be very tempted to invite you to apply to the executive program. As I said, we did get a 34-year-old in last year, and she's someone who, to me, would have been a shoo-in for the executive program, but she really wanted the full-time, so we worked with her hard, and it all went wonderfully. I mean, her group interview was just beautiful. They actually chose her topic, and she made a huge impression, a wonderful impression. And I know she just started to email me recently about being in the first weeks of their pre-term. So it's possible. I mean, you might as well try. If you can maybe apply in round one. If it doesn't work out, you have the EMBA still. You can reapply to the EMBA, and the EMBA deadline, the first one is December. So that is a viable choice, is to apply for full-time. If it doesn't happen and you're in the United States or can arrange to come in when the courses meet, then you could apply to the executive program in December. So I think that we're going to have to wrap up there. Again, I'm going to ask the moderator to put the link to my chat, my forum on GMAT Club, so that you guys, if you have additional questions, feel free to post them there and I will respond. But as always, it's wonderful to have been here at the GMAT Club. And so thanks so much for coming.